Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. It's our monthly look at the Minion Masters Meta. Time. So if you're not familiar with this series, what I do is I scrape the leaderboards on a regular basis, put all that data into a big spreadsheet, and then we extrapolate from that and we try to figure out, based on the leaderboards, what are the best Masters cards, decks, so on and so forth. So we're going to dive in and have a look. As always, we'll go through a lot of the information, so if you do need to pause the video, screenshot, whatever, of course, go ahead and do so. I am thinking about putting these images of these slides on my website, badassfish80.com, so let me know in the comments if you would like to do that. And of course, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Now, our data source, we have over 40,000 decks. That's over 400,000 cards within the data source. But let's crunch that down into something that's a little bit more manageable. So let's start off by having a look at the master popularity. Of course, we're looking at version 2.14, where we're currently in at the moment. So this is overall master popularity in ranked. So yellow 1v1, red 2v2 randoms, blue 2v2 pre-mates, and overall we can see that Stormbringer is number one, Morelia is second, Diona really having a resurgence of late, going up to third, and Ratbo in fourth. Now, interestingly, overall we've seen a decent increase for Miloine for some reason, a decent increase for Morelia, Diona as well. Remember, in fairly recent patches, we've seen the power of Valorian get nerfed a few times, so if people stop playing him, they have to play someone else. Biggest decrease this month is Volko. Volko got nerfed in the last patch, couple of nerfs to the perk 1, the cooldown on that, and the specifics of his ult perk 3. Tronvir also dropping off as well. Right, so let's break this down into a different form so we can have a look at how things have changed between this season compared to last season. So, as always, we have our graph for last season on the left, 2.13, and currently this season on the right, 2.14. So last season we could see master popularity overall in the ranked modes. Ratbo, Stormbringer, Morelia, and Diona were the top 4, whereas this season Stormbringer is up to number 1, Morelia up to number 2, Diona up to number 3, and Ratbo's dropped down to number 4. And again, we spoke about this data just a little while ago. Miloine going up quite a lot, Volko dropping down also quite a lot. Rekt dropping off as well. Remember, Rekt also did get nerfed in the last patch with his ult perk 1, the Guncaster shield being reduced. Okay, so that's master popularity overall, but let's get a little more granular and break it down into our different ranked game modes. This is our 1v1. So of course, again, last season on the left, this season on the right. So last season, Volko, almost 20% of the leaderboard decks, followed by Diona, again almost 20%. So those two masters making up a massive proportion last season. This season they've switched around. Diona is now the master of choice according to the leaderboard data. Volko dropped down to second, Miloine there in third, and Morelia in fourth. Of course, we also show the average mana cost of these decks, not really changing much, but if you're a newer player, it's always good to keep the mana cost between, average mana cost between sort of 3.5 and 4.5 ideally. Of course, there's always outliers, but that will give you a good idea. But of course, you're also going to be interested in your mana curve, you know, cheap cards, more expensive cards, for example, not just the average cost. Right, anyway, so Miloine has gone up a lot in solos. Stormbringer as well. Volko dropping off quite substantially, but still heavily played there in second place. But Diona now in first. The interesting thing is Diona's play rate hasn't really changed. 19% last season, 19.2% this season. But Volko dropped off a huge amount, so therefore Diona is now number 1. But that suggests that the people that were playing Volko previously, they switched to something, but that something wasn't necessarily Diona. So Volko dropping off a lot, and Rekt, as we mentioned before. Okay, so let's switch now to 2v2 randoms, exactly the same format. So last season, Morelia was the 2v2 randoms master of choice, followed by King Puff, Tronvir, and Mordar. This season, Morelia is still there, and even more popular than before, 15%. Last season, 19%. this season. Apep's got up a lot, from 7% to 12%, so from, I don't know, 8th or 9th up to 2nd. Diona, Diona has often been overlooked when it comes to 2v2s, but maybe that's changing now. I'm not sure particularly why. She didn't really have any buff. There was a bug fix to the mana, I think. No, the XP maybe, or the mana from one of the vials got bug fixed, but I don't really know if that particularly changed much. But yeah, biggest increase in randoms, Diona. So previously almost unplayed. This, we're looking at Diona, which is the vibrant orange, now up to 3rd place. So people, I guess people have been sleeping on Diona there. So Diona increased a lot, Apep increased a lot, as well as Morelia. King Puff falling off the most, followed by Tronvir. So that's the randoms. Let's have a look at pre-mades. Okay, so last season, Stormbringer and Ratbow, followed by Tronvir. This season, exactly the same. Stormbringer, Ratbow, and Tronvir. Not really much has changed. The top 3 is the top 3 equating for over 50% of the decks. The top 2 equating to over 40% of the decks. Kind of insane. Not really sure balance-wise how that's going to be changed. Ratbow has seen quite a few nerfs recently, but hasn't really changed anything. Stormbringer's quite tricky to nerf as well. Right, so not much changed in regards to the top 3. King Puff did see an increase in play rate. Volko dropping off a decent amount, as we've seen with the previous modes. Okay, so that's ranked. Let's just have a quick look at draft. Draft, of course, is slightly different because you can't just choose what you want, but if we have a big enough data source, we should get some interesting information. Draft Masters of Choice. For last season, we had Tronvir, Apep, Morelia, and Diona. This season, it's still Tronvir. Morelia has increased. Diona, we're seeing Diona increasing across the board. So biggest increase season on season was Diona. Morelia going up quite a lot as well as King Puff. Apep dropping off, as well as Tronvir, and a little bit of Ravager. And again, nice to see here the average mana cost. It's about the same in draft as it is in constructed, in ranked. Right, quick look at the rarity composition. This doesn't really change much, but it's also always worth pointing this out, especially to newer players. This game is definitely not pay to win. You can see that you don't want a deck just full of legendaries. That's not really going to work. And as you can see from these graphs here, the top row is the current season, the bottom row is the last season. You can see that most decks are comprised of common cards plus rare cards, and then we have some supreme and legendaries in there, but definitely not decks full of legendaries and supremes. Okay, factions. We've got 9 factions in the game, and we can see that Voidborn is still the faction of choice. I mean, this information is one thing we should consider with this is not all factions are created equal. And Voidborn probably has far more cards than some of the other factions as well. So it's not necessarily the fairest way to look at this information. But we just look at what we've got. Voidborn is the number 1. Accursed coming up a reasonable amount compared to last season. Scrat in 3rd place. So Accursed went up. Crystal Elf went up a little bit. Outlander dropped off quite a lot. And Slither dropping off. And I think the Slither dropping off might be related to the nerfs to the Ankahesh, Desert's Doom, the big spider that's not really a spider. That had a very, very high play rate, so even that single card would have a decent effect on these stats. Now, if you want to see the factions broken down by the different game modes, you can do here. We're not really going to go through it too much. Accursed went up a lot in solos, and I think we'll see that when we look at the cards. Accursed is seeing a lot more play. Now, wildcards, always worth reminding. No wildcards in any game mode apart from random, so that's why we have a completely useless 1v1 graph on the left and completely useless 2v2 pre-made graph on the right, but it's always nice to remind ourselves. So, overall, more wildcarding. Last season, 58%. I can't really see, that's too small, but Last season, 58% no wildcards. This season, 53% no wildcards. Remember, wildcards are duplicates, allowing you to use have 3 copies of a single card or 2 copies of 2 cards. Right. So that is wildcarding overall, but what are people choosing to wildcard? So, the number 1 wildcarded card is Skeleton Crew, which we've seen quite a lot over the recent months. Ankahesh is still up there, but has dropped off a lot. So interestingly, actually before we go any further, let me just explain the format of these slides. So we have the color coding around each card, which indicates green, the rank's gone up from last season. Red, the rank's gone down from last season. White, if it's a new card, which you don't currently have. And black, if it has stayed the same since last season. And the numbers, the top left number, so for example, let's look at Skeleton Crew. It's green, so its rank has increased. Top left number 1, that's its current rank, so it's the number 1 ranked card. And Skeleton Crew, sorry, just reading what I look at. The top right number is the 2, which is the last month's rank. So Skeleton Crew is number 1 ranked, was number 2 ranked last season. And we can see Ankahesh Desert's Doom is the opposite of that. It was number 1, it's dropped down to number 2. But yeah, so the play rate has dropped massively on Ankahesh, but it's still huge. You can see there it's still the 2nd most wildcarded card. So what else can we see from this? So Bladestar has seen some more wildcard usage. Soulstealer, I think, has seen a lot more. It can be very difficult to deal with. It now has that vampiric where it heals itself on a kill. I think it's going to lose the wildcards at some point. It's just kind of disgusting, especially in late game if you don't have a good way of dealing with it. So Ankahesh dropped off, as we said. There's been a few other things dropping off as well, but nothing really of note. But always interesting with these wildcards to see we've got some big powerful cards being wildcarded like Ankahesh, and then we just have simple cards like the Heal Puff or the Skeleton Crew. So, you know, you're not just necessarily wildcarding the biggest and strongest of cards. Right, let's move on to the top cards overall. Now, as is often the case, every single card in the game, 295 or something cards now, every single one of them appeared on the leaderboard at some point, which always blows my mind. I always assume there's going to be some that get left out, but every single card showed up at least once. There was one card that was played less than all the others, and if you want to have a guess, put that in the comments. So we're looking for the card that was played least overall based on our information. Right, so here we see the top cards. Top 4 cards, all very basic cards. Skeleton Crew, Swarmers, Heal Puff, Slitherbound. And not really much changing at the top here. Skeleton Crew's still the top played card. We can see Ankahesh has dropped off from last season. It was the number 1 played card. It's dropped down to the 5th top played card overall. And it did see the biggest decrease in play rate. And interestingly, it's always interesting to look at the cards that were balanced in the last patch to see how that affected their play rate. And if we look at the cards that had the biggest decreases in play rate, we had Ankahesh, that got a nerf in terms of HP last season. Drone Walker, that got a nerf in terms of attack speed. Smite, that got a nerf in the format of reduced damage. Wrecked Walker, that lost a nat, and Aimbot got reworked. So those top 5 biggest decreases are the 5 of the cards that were nerfed or reworked. So you can see there the changes that the balance can really have on the play rate of cards. Heal Puff being the biggest increased play rate. People liking that cheap cycle card. Skeleton Crew's gone up a little bit, even though its play rate was huge already. Shielded Crossbow Dudes did see a big increase as well. They got marksmanship in the last patch, so that's not really a huge surprise. Bearvalanche has gone up as well, and I think that's because Smite got nerfed. People switch from Bearvalanche to Smite. Smite got nerfed. They switch back to Bearvalanche. Now, I'm quite surprised to see the Veilstalker there in 19th. Dropping from 17th. It did get a big buff in the last patch, but I'm surprised that it did drop off quite so much. Okay, so those are our top cards overall, but let's break it down a little bit now, and we'll have a look at the top cards per mode. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the non-spells, and the reason we split this up is if you're building a deck, normally you're going to build a deck, you're probably going to think, let me have a couple of spells, and then the rest will be building stroke minions. So I think that's why it makes sense to split this up between spells and minions. So non-spells, minions, stroke buildings. So we've got 1v1, randoms, and pre-mates as always. So again, cheap cards really dominated in solos. Swarmers, Heal Puff, Nether Bats. Spire Stag doing well there in 5th place, likely to get a nerf. It did get a buff that probably was a little bit too much. Frost Feathers still in 6th. That's just the power of their slow. Shielded Crossbow Dudes in 8th, going up from 33rd off the back of that marksmanship that they were given, which is +2 range. Now, of course, when we get into randoms and pre-mates, just 2v2s in general, we can start seeing heavier cards or cards that can deal with Horde better or deal AoE more efficiently. So we can see Ankahesh Desert's Doom. We know that's a good card for killing big units, so we see it way more in 2v2. Blast Monster did see the biggest increase in randoms, up to 6th from 13th. Again, Heal Puff seeing quite a lot. And as mentioned, Ankahesh dropping down to 3rd was the biggest reduction that we saw from the stats. And then in pre-mates, again, Skeleton Crew dominating. It's in 1st place. It's gone up from 3rd, but it's, you know, it's always there or thereabouts near the top. Swarmers, Whirly Scrap, just nice simple cards that do exactly what you want them to do. Nothing too fancy, but just the value that you can rely on. What else did we see? Siege Imperator Ruby. We saw more of her being played in pre-mates. And more Wartrack Dreadnought. Not really sure what that's off the back of, but that's what the stats show. So overall, the Skeleton Crew is the heaviest played card, as we've seen from the previous stats. Right, so that's the non-spells. Let's look at the spells. So, as we alluded to earlier with regards to seeing more accursed, because when we looked at the faction, we saw more accursed in solos. And we can see here from the spell usage, this gives us a very good idea that accursed may be coming back in solos. Unholy Ground, Restless Dead is generally a card you find in accursed decks. Harmful Souls, the same. Grasping Thorns, pretty much the same as well. So I think that's gives a good indication of accursed coming back. And when we look at the cards, the spells in solos that had the biggest increase, Unholy Ground, Restless Dead, Toll of the Dead, Harmful Souls, Corpse Explosion. That's the top 5 increase play rate from last season, and they're all going to be those accursed cards, accursed spells that you would find in accursed decks. And again, when we look at randoms and pre-mates, we start finding different kinds of spells. Not accursed, as you can see, but spells that have a much better return when dealing with lots of enemies at the same time. So we see Bear Avalanche, of course, Blade Star, looking to get maybe a rework, tweak on the figures. I still think the highs may be a bit too high with the Blade Star there. And as we would expect, Smite dropped off a lot and was replaced by Blade Star. So then overall, if we just put all that together, Chain Lightning is the most commonly used spell, followed by Bear Avalanche, Arcane Bolt, Daggerfall, and Arcane Barrage. Now, as we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the rarities of the different cards, remember you have Legendaries, Supreme, Rare, and Common, and we mentioned about how you don't need a deck full of Legendaries, but Legendaries are cool, you can build decks around them, and newer players generally want to get their hands on Legendaries. So this will give you a great idea of, if you're itching to craft some Legendaries, this will give you a good idea of which ones you're going to get some good bang for your buck from. And of course, remember, some Legendaries are very, very deck specific and you're going to build all around them. Other Legendaries are just very strong in their own way and don't need too much synergy. So your mileage may vary depending on what you decide to go for. So one big change in solos, we saw Denver He got a big buff in the last patch. Not sure he necessarily needed it, but he's gone up from 53rd overall in the Legendaries and Solos up to 3rd place. So he went up massively. Morgul has gone up from 2nd to 1st, and Ankahesh still there, but dropping off somewhat. Of course, we get slightly different Legendaries when we look at randoms and pre-mades. Again, here is the Veilstalker in both randoms at 3rd and pre-mades in 4th. Again, dropping off despite getting that buff. And if you're not sure what the buff was, you no longer trigger her crystalline sweep when you use a spell, which was generally mostly just a downside. It just meant your spells costed 1 more whilst she was in play. But we see some staples, as always. The Reconator in 2nd in randoms, Reconator in 2nd in pre-mades, and has gone up actually quite a lot, especially there in pre-mades. So overall, the heaviest played Legendary is still Ankahesh, and still Ankahesh by quite a way. Morgul is the 2nd heaviest played Legendary, and Ankahesh is not too far away from double that play rate. So Ankahesh, Morgul, Veilstalker, Reconator, and Lady and Frey, the Spire Warden. And let's then just have a look at draft. So draft is a little bit different, as we spoke about when we talked about the Masters. You don't necessarily get exactly what you want. If you're not familiar with draft, you build the deck from 3 options at each choice. So you choose a master from 3 options, you choose your first card from 3 options, and so on and so forth. But again, with a big enough amount of data, we should get some interesting insights. And some stuff is just carries over really from ranked, whereas other stuff is definitely different to what we see in ranked, because you know, in draft you're not going to come up against the constructed decks, so things that will often get murdered in ranked play will not necessarily have the same bad time when we get into draft. So for example, I always think it's interesting to have a look at the cards that were played more in draft than in ranked, and we saw that the card that was played most when we compare those two statistics is Sniper Squad. Sniper Squad generally just gets murdered by just about any spell, and you barely ever see it in ranked, but in draft you see it far more regularly because they're not necessarily going to have that removal. Similar thing to Harbinger as well, so that's one of them that's definitely up there in the stats. And of course we have the opposite of that, what cards were played less in draft compared to how often they were played in ranked. Rammer was the top one when it came to that. I think that's because with a Rammer you want to build your whole deck around this sort of aggro stereotype, which you can't necessarily do in draft. Okay, so that we just have a look at the top few cards here. We see Morgul, Berserker, Scrat Horde, Shadow Whelp, Neverbat, Prowler, you know, all good strong cards. And interestingly here, almost all of these cards going up in ranked from last season, so really suggesting that this sort of draft meta almost by design is going to be changing quite a lot. Okay, so those were the non-spell cards in draft. Let's just have a look at the top spells. Chain Lightning, number 1, up from 12th. Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt again is one of those cards that you're not going to see too often in ranked, but can be massively strong in draft, and people choosing to go for it. So Chain Lightning is the number 1, and it had the biggest increase that we saw from the stats. So yeah, if you're looking to build a draft deck and you keep this this sheet handy, you can't really go wrong with any of these spells. Okay, so we've looked at the Masters and we've looked at the cards. Let's put them together and have a look at the top decks. Now, as we've spoke about in previous videos, the way this is calculated is the decks are considered based on where they are on the leaderboard, and also the rank of the cards that they contain. So the top decks will be the ones that are the highest on the leaderboard and are comprised of the strongest cards. Now, And the other way that we do it is that this is the top deck for each master. So it gives you a bit of variety when looking at this. And I say that with sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek, because you can see the first 3 decks are very, very similar. And this is just likely somebody on the leaderboard just trying out different things. And one thing we can see straight away here is that Denver is in almost all of these decks. And he's very strong, difficult to deal with in solos. Often you might allow him to tank on your face to deal with him, but then you're taking face damage. You're taking time to kill him, you're losing XP. So Denver pretty strong in the meta at the moment. So we see Diona, Apep and Tronvir almost identical decks. Ratbo, nice cheap cycle deck here with a couple of heavy units in there. Remember, that's very likely to be using the Ratbo ult perk too, the squeak attack, where you can be generating those burrowed scrats every time you're playing a minion. Right, Ravager is at the bottom of the first page, and then we carry on. We've got a King Puff deck, Volko. We've got an aggro wreck deck there with the Void Altar, Stormbringer using a lot of crystal units, Milloween using the Bridge Shrine, interestingly. So really just sort of denial of bridges here. You've got the Bridge Shrine, the Impetus Blast, Shock Rock, Pincer of Dread, trying to keep your bridge with the Bridge Shrine buff alive. Okay, and then the top 1v1 decks closing out here, we have Setsu, as you'll see, spells, Valorian, Morelia, not an Accursed Morelia, even though we know that they are there or thereabouts, and a Mordar deck, likely still using the normal Mordar perk. Got some decent revives in there. So if you're looking for a top 1v1 deck from any of the masters, that'll give you a good starting point. Okay, then let's move over to randoms. So again, Diona here at the top. So we have a look at the Diona deck, nice cheap deck. We've got Impetus Blast to keep things away from us or move things towards us, or deny bridge grabs, Hypnotize to punish big chunks of units. Curse Bearer, of course, very good against big units, that curse doing massive DPS. And we see Ankahesh as the spearhead of the deck of choice. Right, Tronvir and Apep, again, identical decks, just with different masters. Morelia, again, not an accursed deck. I mean, it has a lot of accursed in there, but not really taking too much benefit from the Ascension. Only Skeleton Crew is going to get any buff there from Ascension. And we can see here, of course, randoms does have wildcards. So if you look above Bladestar, for example, it does have that little tab showing you that Bladestar is wildcarded. Ratbo, I think this was a deck that I was trying out with Ratbo. Decently strong for sure. Next up we have King Path, Wrecked, Mordar. Interesting Mordar deck. We have some bad revives in there, so you do have to play it carefully. But of course, you could potentially switch to use the Mordar ult perk, where you're reviving the enemy stuff instead of yours. Milloween, we've got a smattering of spells, as you would expect, and Feng at the top there. And then we have a very aggro Setsu deck, a couple of Zeppelin bombers, we've got the Rammer in there, so on and so forth. And then closing out the random decks, we have a Stormbringer deck, which is different to what we often see. Mostly see Stormbringer with a lot of Crystal Elf units, not in this one. And then we have Valorian, Aggro Ravager, and interesting Volko deck there with Future Present, giving you that long-term value. Right, we're going to switch now to look at the pre-made top deck, and as we always mentioned before, in previous videos, with pre-mades you have to consider some pre-made decks are built to be flexible and play with anyone. Other pre-made decks are built to play specifically with another deck. So definitely something to keep in mind when you're deciding which of these decks to play together. Okay, so the top deck here is Ratbo, and a lot of similarities as we go through. Skeleton Crew we can see there in all of those top decks. Swarmers being played a lot, Slitherbound being played a lot. Of course, these cheap bridge grab units, always very powerful. And Arcane Bolt in 4 of the top 5. And also always nice to see Black Hole making an appearance there in the Stormbringer deck. Next up we have a Mordar deck. Again, quite a lot of bad revives in this Mordar deck, so likely playing the alt perk. Diona, we saw how much more Diona is being played. And again, a Morelia, but not on a Curse Morelia. Setsu, interesting Mountain Shaper. That's definitely a card we see more. There was many months where the Mountain Shaper was just completely unplayed. Definitely see more of that. Milloween here with a Crystal Elf flavor. And then we see a Ravager deck, a Valorian deck, a Wrecked deck with Korgoth there, and Volko. So those are the top decks. So hopefully that gives you a great idea if you want to choose a deck, choose a master, choose what cards. That gives you a great sort of base of information of what's strong in the current meta. Now, the next section we're going to go through very quickly because we don't want this video to get too long. And basically, I'm not going to talk about it at all. We're just going to go through it. And if you want to pause the video, screenshot it, whatever, then do so. Right. So we're going to look at the top cards in solos, non-spells in solos, spells in solos, top legendaries in solos, in randoms, top cards, non-spells in randoms. Sorry, I got a little bit confused there. Top spells in randoms, and top legendaries in randoms. Top cards overall in pre-mades, top cards non-spells in pre-mades, top spells in pre-mades, and top legendaries in pre-mades. And then we're just going to break it down to the different masters. If you're looking to build a deck for a specific master, then this should be helpful. So APEP, solos, randoms, pre-mades, and we'll do that for each of the masters. So Diona, King Puff, Milloween, Mordar, Morelia, Wrecked, Ratbow, Ravager, Setsu, Stormbringer, Tronvir, Valorian, and finally Volko. There we have it. We got through it, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. Hopefully you found this interesting. Whether you're a new player, an experienced player, it should give you some helpful information. Let me know if you do want to see these slides put up on my website. If there is interest in it, then I'll do that, and then that gives you somewhere that you can go back and look easily. If you're enjoying the content here, of course, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That thumbs up really does help. And that's pretty much all I want to cover today. My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank.